Alright, so I threw together this blank project with some information gathering stuff set up. So I'm going to walk you through this real quick. Very top left, FPS counter, standard fare. Top right is a slider that lets me actually change the FPS. Bam, bring it down to 50. Boop. The two values below the FPS counter is actually counting the number of times that the updates method and the fixed updates methods are called. This basically means how many times the code in those sections are run. Just increments every time, moving the FPS will reset it. The ratio is just the ratio of those two numbers. Mouse wheel value, it doesn't matter right now. Fixed update rate is the actual number of times fixed update is being run. Don't worry about that too much. And then the other two values I'll explain later. As you can probably see, with the FPS this high, update is running a lot more than fixed update, like ratio 18 per 1 fixed update. Pretty big deal. This is because fixed update is meant to be a regular, dependable, this runs X number of times every second type deal. That's really important when you're designing a game. You know those really shitty games that have a completely different speed at different FPSs? Yeah, this is why. They don't use fixed update or its equivalent in whatever engine they're using. You know those shitty games don't make their own engines. So their game is entirely dependent on the FPS, and the lazy ones just lock their FPS instead of fixing their shitty programming. That's personal rant. So how does this matter for reeling? Well, Unity has its own input manager that AOTTG pulls from to figure out when you press a key or scroll the wheel. That input manager is running on update, effectively. The problem is that in Fang's code, he's checking for the mouse wheel in fixed update. Okay, repeating the question, why is that a problem? We're going to have to talk about how Unity handles the mouse wheel real quick to answer that question. Alright, so what we're going to talk about here is probably the root cause of the issue. So, the thing you need to know, Unity has its input manager which runs on its update, and AOTTG asks that input manager, hey, is this button being pressed? Is this mouse wheel being scrolled? Whatever. And the input manager effectively just says yes or no, and AOTTG does its magic with whatever answer it gets. So, the input manager detects the scroll wheel for one frame only. Why is that? Because if you scroll your mouse wheel right now, you'll notice that it catches after a short distance. That's because the computer doesn't detect some kind of continuous value for scroll velocity or something. That's calculated after the fact by a program. It detects each of those catches, and that's, hey, you scrolled, hey, you scrolled, hey, you scrolled. It detects it like that, just yes or no. So the input manager detects that for one frame, and for that one frame it says yes, you are scrolling. And then as soon as it ticks over to the next frame, it resets that value if you're not scrolling. So for that one single frame, the value is true. That's important. You'll notice that the first frame, like I said, it's yes, you are scrolling. The next frame, it's no, and no other point does it say yes. So when it gets to that fixed update frame, which remember where AOTTG is reading the mouse wheel, it will ask the input manager, hey, are we scrolling right now? The input manager will say no, because it did catch a scroll during one of its update frames, but by the time it got to the fixed update, it wasn't true anymore. So logically, you're not scrolling. So AOTTG will say, okay, you didn't scroll, we're not going to reel you in. That's that. This picture here isn't actually that bad a ratio, so you actually have a fairly high hit rate. In order for the input to be detected, you have to have scrolled, or basically have your mouse wheel catch at the update frame before the fixed update, essentially. Because it's 4-to-1, it's actually not a terrible ratio. If you scroll fast, you're probably going to catch it and get a hit. But if you are more like this, at 1,000 or so FPS with 18 update frames and one fixed update frame, you're going to have a hard fucking time getting it right on that very last update frame before the fixed update. This is the core of the problem. So I've set up this project to increment a number whenever it detects a certain type of scrolling. It's listening for scrolling down in update and listening for scrolling up in fixed update. So watch what happens when I scroll down. goes pretty much how you expect. Pretty much picked up all of that. Let's see what happens when I scroll up for a little bit. Remember, this is running on fixed update, not update. Yeah. So that was a lot of scrolling and far less hits than update. And that is the center of the problem. There's a huge difference between detection rate at the input, and the higher the FPS, the higher that discrepancy. And that is why your reeling is not sensitive, why it misses half the time. And we can actually move this to a more accurate detection just by manipulating the frame rate. As you can see, it's now doing 1 update per fixed update. If I scroll down, if I scroll up, it's roughly the same level of detection. So this is a really dumb thing to overlook, and Bang managed it. So again, this is why that happens. I hope this was a helpful video. I guess like it if it was. I don't know. I don't really care about YouTube too much in terms of likes or subscribers or whatever, so do whatever you want. I don't know. Comment your favorite food if you just feel bored. I'm gonna stop this here. Goodbye. Alright, so here I am in game, and I'm running at a fairly high FPS, not too high. So here we are, and I'm able to get a pretty good amount of my reels, honestly. However, you can actually kind of see the effect I'm talking about if you reel really, really slowly. Like just one little click of the mouse wheel at a time. I've been doing it the entire time I've been swinging around this tree, and it hasn't registered. Did it have to be an aberrant? So, if you scroll fast and a lot whenever you reel, you'll probably be able to overcome it at a frame rate like this, but whenever you start playing at super high frame rates, which can happen, even scrolling really fast just doesn't avoid the misses that I was talking about. Okay, so how do I fix this? Well, go to your mod of choice and go into the FPS setting. Once you're here, set it to something close to 50 that you saw in the video. I'm going to set it to 60 because I'm not a pleb. Alright, and now if I go swing around this tree and click my mouse wheel once, it immediately reels. Swing around this tree, click wheel once, it reels. It's picking up the input basically every time with just one little click of the mouse wheel. This is pretty close to the ideal ratio. It's about 1.2 updates per fixed update. It's not a bad solution, but you have to deal with the fact that you're playing at a lower frame rate, and when you get moving at higher speeds, it starts to be noticeable. This is not acceptable to me. So, this is where the self-advertising comes in. If I turn off the FPS limit and go into my controls menu, my mod has something called revamped reeling. Basically what this does is when, well, basically it listens during the update frames for those scrolling, catches. And when it hears one, it saves it until the fixed update frame. So it basically sort of holds the input until it can be used. And as a result, I basically never miss a reel now. One little click of the mouse wheel is all it takes, just like it should be. So now I can have my super high FPS, and also I can have my super responsive reeling. This right here has completely spoiled me. RC basically requires you to choose between a high FPS and a responsive reel, and I don't like that choice, so I made this. There were a few things I sort of glossed over earlier regarding Unity and some low-level functionality, but this is basically the problem, and you can understand it well enough what I've told you, I think.